Hello everyone and welcome. In this video I want to provide a bit of an update to the one button rotation stuff / rotation helper stuff that Blizzard is adding in the next patch, which is coming out tomorrow as I make this video. The goal is basically just to make it a companion to my previous video, which went over things in sort of more broad detail. Well, this one is mainly about new numbers. So check out the previous video if you have no idea what's going on. This video will just be sort of a correction / update to the numbers presented in that video. So I should reiterate some of how these numbers actually work. So Simulation Craft, which is the underlying, simulation tool / code that runs raid bots, reads the rotation from the game files directly. And so whenever Blizzard updates the logic of their rotation helper on the back end, that will be automatically implemented in Simulation Craft basically within minutes. So, there may be future videos where if they make big changes and the numbers change a lot, I'll sort of keep you updated. And so, if you want that, subscribe. But these sims and these numbers are based on the latest update of this rotation helper logic from Blizzard as of June 16th, which is the day before the patch drops. So another small thing here is, well, first of all, you can actually sim this for yourself going forward by adding these commands to your SIMC expert mode. I go over exactly how that works in my previous video, linked at the top of the description. But you can use these commands in raid bots essentially to sim with this stuff yourself. Finally, one more thing is that there are some, these numbers are essentially the worst case scenario, because they can probably even better with talent build changes that are more synergistic with the Blizzard rotation, meaning, the rotation helpers play a pretty simplified, to be honest, bad version of most of the specs. Well, what if you can change the default talent build around so that will actually be a little bit more DPS than it otherwise would? Because most theory crafting assumes if you play perfectly with the right talents and everything, and with the right rotation, what is the best combination of rotation and talents? And that's the kind of stuff you can find on my Icy Veins guides, also linked in the description. But when you're using the rotation helper, well, then you're using a totally different set-in-stone rotation that Blizzard provides, and the fact that you're using this rotation may change what is the best talent build as well. But for this video, we're just kind of looking at the worst-case scenario, sort of the fundamental baseline of what you can expect when using these tools, and maybe if there's a lot of demand and interest in it, then I'll start doing maybe theory crafting videos going over, okay, what are the best talent builds when you're using rotation helper and one button mode and so on. But you should consider that these numbers are worst case scenario and that, it can pretty much only get better from here unless, something fundamentally changes in Season 3. Let's get into the numbers. So BM single target, we're looking at around a 4% DPS loss just from rotation helper. Obviously, Beast Mastery is a fairly easy spec to play, and so it's no surprise that the rotation helper is actually quite good. One button mode, however, costs an additional 15% DPS. So while Beast Mastery is a fairly simple spec, it is rather fast-paced, and it does rely you to sort of stay on top of your globals and not have a lot of downtime. Well, the one-button mode introduces, 300 milliseconds of downtime for every single GCD. That costs BM dearly. And so if you combine these two, if you're using the one-button mode, you can expect to perform, if you're biz geared and everything and you get decent RNG, around 65th percentile. So you'd be going from the 99th percentile if you're playing perfectly with great gear to around 65th percentile, a mid-blue pass on Sprocketmonger Mythic, which is the fight that I've sort of used for this general comparison. For Beastmastery AoE, it's a much bigger DPS loss to use the rotation helper, 11% up from 4% on single target, and the one button mode is still around a little bit worse as well at 17%. Part of the reason that the Beastmastery AoE rotation with the Blizzard helper and so on is so much worse is that it casts multi-shot all the time, because it refreshes Beast Cleave whenever there's less than 2 seconds left on it, which is just way too early. And that would be relatively easy to fix on Blizzard's end along with other improvements, but for now, it's really quite bad, because it'll just drop a ton of barb shots, because it's it'll be kill command, because that's top priority, right? And then it's oh, Beast Cleave is about to drop, I better multi-shot, and it just ends up being 70% or 80% kill command and multi-shot, and then a little bit of barb shots after that, so not great. Next up is Marksmanship, so 8% loss from the deep rotation helper on single target, and the one button mode costs an additional 8% DPS, which is actually quite a bit less than for BM. So this is because the one button mode delay does not affect casts that take longer than a GCD to cast to begin with. So it's not going to add 0.3 seconds to most of your aim shot casts in the same way that it's going to add 0.3 seconds to almost all of your kill command casts. Generally much better for specs with a cast time, they tend to do better with one button mode. When you combine the two, 16% DPS loss means that you could perform at 77th percentile on Sprocket Monger Mythic compared to 99th percentile players. So significantly better performance from Marksmanship on single target than Beast Mastery pretty much around the board with the one button mode. If you're only using the rotation helper, well, we'll see later on, but generally it's going to be much, much closer because MM single target has a much greater DPS loss from the rotation helper, but a smaller one from one button mode, whereas Beast Mastery doesn't lose much from the rotation helper, but it loses a ton from the one button mode. Marksmanship AoE, we're going with Sentinel here. It's only a 2% DPS loss to use the rotation helper only, which is really impressive. And then the one button mode costs an additional 10%, which is sort of a moderate amount. But still, with your by pressing one button, you'll only do 12% less overall AoE DPS than someone playing absolutely perfectly. That is not bad at all. And for Marksmanship Dark Ranger, if you're using that in Mythic Plus, which I think is sometimes better, then it's only 14%. So very, very strong for Marksmanship and AoE in general, whether you're just using the rotation helper or if you're also combining it with the one button mode. So Marksmanship is probably the most impressive one button / rotation helper spec overall. Next up is Survival. So 10% DPS loss from rotation helper, that's by far the worst for all three specs, and the one button mode is also an additional 17% DPS, which is also on the higher end. So Survival just generally loses massively using both the rotation helper and the one button mode. If you combine the two, you can expect to perform at only 20th percentile on Sprocket Monger Mythic. If you have perfect gear, really, really bad performance. So part of it is that Survival is GCD locked, and so it suffers greatly from the grid ACD. And then it just has these mechanics that are sort of tied to timing windows, and the slowed down rotation of the one button helper just does not do it any favors at all. For AoE, it's quite a bit better for Survival at only 5% AoE DPS loss from the rotation helper. One button mode remains at around 11% DPS. Well, actually, Sentinel is much, much lower than it is for Pack Leader, and we'll see that in the AoE section as well for Pack Leader. So Sentinel AoE Survival is pretty good, sort of not nearly as good as MM, but still quite strong overall. For Survival Pack Leader on AoE, which is what I recommend you play when you don't run either the rotation helper or one button mode, it's quite bad. You're looking at a 25% DPS loss combined, 9% rotation helper, and 16% for one button mode for Survival Pack Leader AoE. So basically, if you're going to use either of these assistances as Survival in Mythic Plus, I recommend that you do not run Pack Leader, which is what I normally recommend, but instead that you run Sentinel, because the DPS losses from it are just so much smaller. Alright, that brings us to the spec rankings, where I've basically taken, I've looked at the simmed DPS of all the specs with each kind of assistance and basically been like, okay, if you're only going to use the rotation helper, what performs well? Or what is the best one button hunter spec? So going into it here, Marksmanship with the DPS helper is on top, really, really close to Beast Mastery. Basically, if you're using the rotation helper in the raid, you can pretty much play either spec. They're going to perform very similarly, so it just becomes about vibes at that point, really. With Survival being quite a bit behind when you're just using the rotation helper. When you're introducing one button to the equation, Marksmanship is massively dominant here at 8% above Beast Mastery, and then Beast Mastery itself is around 6% above Survival. So it's a very sort of clear pecking order here where, generally speaking, with these assistances, Marksmanship performs much better than the other specs. If you're only using the rotation helper in the raid, then Marksmanship and BM are very close. But as soon as you get AoE introduced at all, Marksmanship is going to dominate. So generally speaking, if you're using assisted hunter play at all, Marksmanship is your spec to go at the moment. Next up is Mythic Plus spec rankings. So what I've done here is I've compared single target and AoE damage of all the specs. And then I've basically just sort of added them together, normalized them. So it's basically like assuming that AoE and single target and Mythic Plus have roughly equal weight. Generally, it's a bit more AoE weighted, but we know that Marksmanship performs much better there as well. So the Mythic Plus ranking basically goes Marksmanship, massively dominant. And then comes the interesting and sort of damning part here, which is that Marksmanship with a one-button rotation performs better than Beast Mastery does with just the rotation helper. So just like the raid here, in general, you really can't go wrong with Marksmanship if you're going to use assisted gameplay in any capacity whatsoever. It goes Marksmanship, Beast Mastery, and then Survival with the helper. Roughly 10% from Marksmanship down to Beast Mastery, and then another 6% from Beast Mastery down to Survival. And with the one button rotation, the gap is even more significant and in Marksmanship's favor, with Marksmanship performing 15% better than Beast Mastery with a one button rotation, and then Survival being a little bit behind that. So that's pretty much it. You know, it's up to you whether you want to use this. I talk a bit more in the other video about, you know, some of the considerations that you may make that you haven't made yet. But overall, I mean, you're looking at, for Marksman, like if you just want to play WoW in the most straightforward, chill way, and you just want to press one button, you're only looking at around a 16% DPS loss in a raid compared to perfect play, which is still good enough for 77th percentile. And in AoE and Mythic Plus and stuff, you're only looking at like 12%. So yeah, anywhere from 12 to 16% total DPS loss when using both assistances combined when you're playing Marksmanship. That is not bad at all. And if you don't want to use the one button and you just want to use the rotation helper, well, then you're looking at somewhere like 8% on single target and as little as 2% on Mythic Plus and AoE and stuff. Which, of course, this is pure AoE. So for Mythic Plus overall, the number is going to be somewhere between this one for single target and this one for AoE. But still, single-digit DPS loss from using rotation helper's Marksmanship. So yeah, that's pretty much the conclusion. If you like this sort of video, check out my patreon.com/Azortharion, where you can get my Hunter weak hours, UI, basically a lot of tools to help you just take your gameplay to the next level. And of course, you can also join my Discord, whether you're a sub or not, where you can get access to my Huntmaster's chat if you're a Patreon. But even if you're not a sub, you can also just ping me in there and ask me questions. I provide quite a bit of access, and I answer pretty much everyone personally in my Discord, unless someone else answers the question first. Also provide one-on-one Discord coaching. If that's something you're interested in, go to calendly.com/Azortharion on your screen right now. And yeah, hope this was useful to you. Leave a comment, like, subscribe, and peace.